Welcome to the Learning Reinvented Podcast, brought to you by myself, James Poletyllo, and the team from The Learning Effect. There are lots of learning podcasts out there, so we wanted to do something slightly different. This week, we're catching up with Rob Moores to talk about his views on learning and development. Rob, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, James. Thanks for inviting me along. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, sure. So I've been in learning development. Well, I guess the short story is for the whole of my career, from being a kind of technical trainer, as I was called, in the NHS at the turn of the millennium, through to now running my own L&D and Leadership consultancy, and that's seen me go through companies like Sky, Talk, the NHS, kind of internet security firms, pretty much kind of whole life cycle stuff, really, from designing and managing and leading and delivering. So kind of all the traps I talk about that we fall into as L&D, I've fallen into every single one of them.
So interesting, across that journey, as you said, you spanned public sector, private sector, you're now working for yourself. So last time we caught up, we were talking about the things that were most important to you about learning. So what are they?
Well, I think the things that are the most important to me, two things I think have become crucial, and then they span over a third. The two things that are crucial are leadership and coaching, because I think we can get too obsessed with trying to build a learning culture, when I personally believe we're all learning all the time anyway. We seem to think that learning can only be this thing that's a positive impact on an organisation, whereas if people are finding back doors to processes and developing bad habits within their work, they're doing that because they're learning them. They're learning them from somebody, or they're learning them themselves, or they're learning it from the system, whatever it might be. So I found that the role of the leader and great leadership, and the ability to have coaching conversations as a leader, but also with yourself and with peers, is absolutely crucial to guiding that learning, to start to build a culture of coaching rather than learning. And the thing that underpins all of those for me is the ability to communicate and have a great conversation. And one of my kind of funny bugbears more than anything is the kind of corporate lingo that we fall into. I've got this phrase that I say when these kind of corporate buzzwords come out, and that is, would you say that at home? And if the answer is yes, I'd say that at home, fair enough. But if you're starting to choose words that you wouldn't say at home, or even to the colleague next to you, why are you speaking like that? So I think as far as the world of learning is concerned, it's communication, conversation, and then leadership and coaching on top of it. Those are the most important things for me now.
So in terms of looking at that, because interestingly, you've touched on the theme of learning culture, and I saw some stuff flying around on LinkedIn this morning just questioning the term, and people are trying to engineer out different things in their business. They're trying to create different things, and certain people or products are trying to sell you the perfect learning culture, like there is such a thing. Again, you get all of those things in business. But bring it back to leadership, and I agree with you. So much sits within the leader of a team. How do we set those leaders up for success? And you've worked for some pretty hefty organisations, in something like the NHS or Sky or one of those. How do you set those leaders up to be able to develop their teams, coach, lead them in a way that is conducive to a good business performance, to people realising their potential, or whatever else you think might be important in that?
Well, there's a few things in it again. I think the first one is that too much leadership development happens when someone becomes a leader. And then we all have these conversations at some point about how our leaders, when they first come into a role, they tend to be selected because they were the best performer in a team, and then suddenly they're having to lead the team that yesterday they were part of. And then we try and build development around how do you deal with that situation? Well, a great situation around that, and I wrote a blog once that I called Leadership pregnancy rather than leadership probation. So instead of putting someone in that role and then seeing how they go for the next 9 months, give them 9 months of preparing to be a leader before they actually are one. All that development. So on that first day, they know what's expected of them. The people around them have seen these people develop as leaders, and people feel less inclined to have to try and prove now that there's something different on the Monday morning than they were on the Friday afternoon. And I had a podcast guest of my own, actually, that it put this wonderfully, who was a major in the army, and she talked about when people come into the army, they are trained in 2 things. One, their job. No matter what level, what job you're doing, you're trained how to do your job, but also you're trained what it means to be a leader and a follower in the army, because you can't have leaders unless you have followers. So what does it mean to be both of those things? And thereafter, you are continually developed as both, not just in your job. You know, and how many organizations can genuinely say that they do that for leaders in sort of the sectors that we're familiar with and work for?
I think picking up from the point you made about preparing people for leadership before they get there, so not throwing them in at the deep end or starting to do that development once they're in place. I think the flip side to that as well is developing potential leaders in terms of recognizing them. So where do you recognize innate leadership skills? And, you know, to your point back in the army, of if we're teaching leadership to every role, not just those with the title of manager or leader, you know, you should expect people to lead themselves. There's an element of leadership in that. They should be able to lead and participate in a team in a way that's not just I sit there and wait to be told what to do, but in the same way, you know, back to what you're talking about following, is there's a time where you just need to be able to be part of that team and not pull us in a different direction or you know, try and change what we're doing. But I think organizations often don't recognize those leadership skills in their business, because sometimes those leadership skills, or the people who are true leaders, are the ones who are maybe a little bit disruptive, and the ones who, you know, are questioning things, or you know, you talked about people finding back doors. Actually, there's some really positive traits in someone who goes, I'm being given this absolutely useless process from Central, and I found a way to make this work. May not 100%. Be in your manual, but this is working for my business. It's helping my performance, and I'm helping that new starter fit in because I know that the induction is pretty poor, and I'm the one who's going to take it on myself to take them to lunch, or to point out that there's a way of doing this differently. Or no one does that, even though they tell you in induction. And a lot of us will rail against those things, but sometimes those really core innate skills of the disruptor are the leadership skills you should be empowering and letting that person progress.
I completely agree, and I think, you know, that therein comes that importance of coaching and leadership again. That if you've got the situation that you talked about there, where you've got an induction that is teaching one thing, and then the second they go out, the people who actually do the job have found better or more efficient ways of doing it, so they teach those new starters to do it in another way, and the leaders aren't really that close to that, and they aren't coaching those people to find the reasons why they're doing these things, and what actually the reasons are for finding these back doors, and what benefit there are, and if there's any impact to them doing that. You know, things like working on bonuses, for example, or customer experience, or systems login, all these things that the end user might not be familiar with. Well, if you do that and you embrace that coaching culture, then that suddenly becomes part of the feedback that goes back to the training. Because for me, it's positive disruption, yeah, but that positive disruption has very little cultural change because it's not embedded and dug into. And like you say, the inductions continue to run as they were. Whereas the kind of that army example again, what was happening was that by developing those people in parallel and judging people not just by how they do their job, but also how they lead themselves and others as part of a team, not because they've got a team, then what they actually found was that when the positions became available, it was quite often not the best performers in the team that got the role, because others had stepped up more naturally in those situations with things like the positive disruption, the questioning of certain processes and tasks, looking to reinvent them. Those are the ones that started to get the leadership roles, and everyone was a lot more comfortable with it. You know, the great performers were kind of relieved that they can carry on performing greatly rather than now suddenly have to manage someone to do that. So I think you're absolutely right. The positive disruption is definitely a trait of that. But you know, it's interesting in that word itself. I run an exercise on one of the courses that I run around traits, and I actually go down the route of you're only a great leader if you're remembered as being one. And it's rarely because of the traits. You know, I think we develop leaders, certainly in larger organizations, based on a list of traits. Leaders need to be this, and this. Whereas if you actually sit down and think about a great leader that you had, and instead of listing the traits, list how they made you feel. What did they do for you? How did they make you feel? How did they make you better and unlock your potential? You actually start getting a much more emotive way of thinking. And I think, you know, culturally then, to lean your leadership development to start with how you want leaders to make people feel and work towards those traits rather than starting with them actually gives you a much friendlier and nicer culture that's more likely to lead to that performance and results, but people want to stay at the same time.
Yeah, and I think there's, you know, you see very different approaches to leadership development, as you'll know. You know, there's the sort of theoretical, let's throw a load of models at you and give you some practical tools that you can apply, or, you know, you've got more of the task-based stuff of actually you're not really a leader, you are here to do a load of management-ish or supervisory type functions, maybe carry out a few processes that are embedded in the people team, and you're probably still actually doing the majority of the stuff you do is work or escalations or organization. And it's where does that leadership piece come into businesses that are stuck in that sort of mold? How do they break the cycle of our leaders aren't really leaders, we haven't really got a business culture that empowers these things, it's still very top down? You know, you've got those organizations out there. So how do you sort of embed that coaching culture and within that business that is still thinking in that more traditional way? Because I know a lot of our listeners will be in those organizations thinking, I often hear on podcasts these people are talking about their amazing things they're doing in these huge businesses and they've got huge budgets, or, you know, they've made huge waves, and I'm here and I'm struggling to see the surface here. I'm struggling to make an impact in their business. So where should people start in terms of trying to move that dial if they are in that type of situation?
Well, I think, you know, the really kind of blunt response to this, which is what I often say to people, is that there is no silver bullet for this stuff. And I would say 99% of the time, if you're being sold something that promises you that it's going to change it, you're being lied to. Because no one can promise that. There are different ways of running a business and different ways of defining success. And one of the examples I talk about a lot is if you look at the difference between someone, say, like a football club in Chelsea compared to a football club in someone like Liverpool or Manchester United, that sort of comparison. You cannot argue that all three of those clubs have been successful. Certainly, if you go from kind of the mid-2000s, the investment Chelsea had, they have won everything there is to win. Mm-hmm. But from a leadership cultural point of view, the kind of like the standards that are put out there and the way of operating, they couldn't be more different to each other. The kind of Liverpools and the Man Uniteds want to build a culture, and certainly I think over the last 4 or 5 years this has been true, where there's a steadiness to leadership there and an investment in trying to build connection with fans and with the staff, with the players, and building a team that trusts and believes in each other to mount towards success. Whereas you look at someone like Chelsea, you look at the amount of money they've spent and the amount of managers they've gone through, and actually the success that they've had immediately before sacking managers. Now, quite often managers have won a Champions League and then been sacked, or won the league 6 months later, been sacked. They've gone through a lot of people, and quite often, quite attritionally really, that quite a lot of players and managers who've gone to Chelsea haven't really done much afterwards, because they've either kind of gone a downward step to try and rebuild themselves, or never really been heard of again. Whereas the opposite tends to be true at United and Liverpool, that they tend to go on to something bigger because they've been growing in that potential space. But I couldn't go up to a Roman Abramovich, the kind of owner of Chelsea, and say, you're rubbish at what you do. You don't run a successful business. Because he'll go, look at the trophies, look at the cabinet. Go and run down the road and compare it to what Tottenham have won in the last 20 years. So I think, in terms of those people who are sat in businesses now, there will be some businesses run by some senior leadership teams and owners that just don't want to run it in this way. And you'll find that it'll be very difficult and attritional to yourself to do that. So the honest answer there is sometimes to say, figure that out and find somewhere that is more likely to want to run in that way and does. However, if it is something you think is likely, I think that the key thing for me is start with the mindset change. Too often what we do, and again, these are things that I've done in the past, we try to train people into that change. So we'll train leaders how to coach, we'll train leaders how to have difficult conversations, we'll train leaders to build rapport and build engagement within teams. But if you train these things, it's a little bit like training resilience. And I compare that to training someone to be a millionaire. If I train you that, at the end of the course, you're not a millionaire. In the same way, you're not a coach, you're not resilient, you're not great at objection handling just because you've had the training. You've got to go away and then do the things, and with a little bit of luck as well, and work with others to achieve these things, to become that. And that's why, for me, the skill set first approach rarely works, because when you go back to the organisation, something else gets in the way.
I think unless someone's bought into and sees why they're going to do something and they own that, it's all we always talk about purpose. If there's no purpose for the individual, if that person doesn't see that, you're just pushing against everything else. You're just something else pushing that they're going to deflect off. Because when you see people go on training over the years, and the amount of people walk through the door, why are you here, been sent, or whatever else of those stories. Well, look, we've all been there. If you've delivered frontline training, that people who turn up, they've got no purpose, they are ticking a box and they're in front of you, and you are, like you said, you're trying to then in the room do the best with what you can. When you're then going back out into the rest of the business and you're saying, okay, why have we got that situation? What can we do? What can we link back into purpose and bring people on that? And whatever you're delivering, whatever your approach is, it's always got to start with that purpose, to me, because otherwise you've got people in front of you and you're spending a whole session trying to sell something that people don't want, or you're trying to change a way of approaching learning or development or coaching, or you're trying to get leaders to behave in ways that they, to your Roman Abramovich point of him going, well, I'm not gonna buy this because I really don't believe in it. My mind isn't open to that. But if Roman Abramovich has something that you can tap into and think, actually, I understand where your pain point is, I can understand why you're having this challenge, and I'm going to get alongside you. And it's back to your coaching piece. It's that influencing is helping people on that journey to say, actually, there is a better way of doing that. And I think, those coaching skills are part of your influencing skills to change the culture. They're not only for your leaders, they're part of your role if you're working across a business. And
I think, there is that kind of subjective piece to that, because I love the way you said there, that there is a better way of doing this. It being a better way is very kind of subjective to people. For me, it is a better way to have a business that's built on values and vision and leads with that. And everyone knows every day why it's important to have coaching conversations, why it's important to talk to your people, why it's important to build that rapport and connection first, and then performance on top of that. I think that's better. Yeah, after 16 years in charge of Chelsea Football Club, Roman Abramovich doesn't think that's a better way. He thinks it is better to go out and go, right, okay, this one isn't performing for the last 2 weeks. I'm going to sack him, pay him off, and go and bring in someone else and throw some money at that one instead. He thinks that's a way better for him. So what are the kind of words, what are the definitions behind that? And I kind of go, well, for me, I think it's better because it's less attritional. I think that fewer people leave these types of organizations, more people want to stay in these types of organizations, more people want to work for each other and with each other, and more people enjoy going to work and achieving together. And I think that's really important. Some other people might not. Some people say, yeah, I'm going to really flog it for 2 years and then get a massive payout and then have a year doing nothing. Great. And that's what's great for them. If there's something in you though that thinks in this way, that wants to work in this way, that's the key. And to get people then to all begin to think in the same way. And you can't do the whole organization at once. You know, if you've got your own team, and to your listeners, you know, if you've got your own L&D team, or even if it's your own L&D design team or smaller function within it, start there and go, what is my vision for this team? And yes, there's a vision for the business, but what's your vision for that team? What are the values that team are built on? What are the behaviors that are going to prove to you that that vision and those values are true? And when you do that, then you can start to go, okay, we'll build on the performance on top of that is going to be dependent on things like coaching. So unless you can actually say coaching and conversations are crucial to the performance of this business, and this is why they are, and this is how we're going to measure the impact of that, why are people going to do it? You know, if I told you go to the canteen every day and eat a Cornish pasty, it's crucial for the business. One day you don't go and have one and then go, oh, I didn't affect anything. Why should I do it tomorrow? It's got to be that completely explicit and aligned link to get people to be excited about doing it. And to your point about learning and people to coming on to training and say, I don't even know why I'm here. It happens so often because there isn't that alignment and close connection. You know, there will be examples in yourself, James, and your listeners as well, where they have asked for some development because they've known they needed to do something and been excited about it so they can achieve something else. It might be at work, it might be in the private life, whatever it might be. And there's so much difference when you know what it is you want to achieve, why you want to achieve it, and then say, this is what I need to learn to be able to do that. I've accepted responsibility for that. I'm going to go out and do it, rather than be made accountable for something that you don't even know what's going on, but thrown on a course and then say, there you go, now I'm going to measure you on it. It just doesn't work as well.
No, and I think, you know, going back, you've got the Roman Abramovich example, which is quite extreme. But, you know, you've got many people who are in businesses with what I'd call that sort of muddling mess of L&D that's happened over time. So they've probably not created it. They've maybe inherited it. They've maybe landed in it. There's an expectation. So, you know, they're landing in there and they're trying to evolve their team. And, you know, it's weird how, you know, I've been in this situation a number of times where you go in and people have got used to the shopping list, or they've got used to what's there, the status quo, and you want to remove it. And even though everyone knows it's not great, you know, they know it doesn't really serve them well, people don't want to remove that. They don't want to make that step towards something else. They don't want to change the culture. They don't want to change the architecture of whatever's in place. In my experience, it's driven by two things potentially. It's driven by, sometimes in busy businesses, people don't have the time to take on new ways of thinking or working, or they don't believe they do. They're just like, this is another thing that is maybe important, but maybe not top of my agenda. So it will sit there as a nice to have at number 4 or 5 on my agenda for a while, as lots of things do. There's not enough of an evidence base for people of a different way working, because they haven't seen it elsewhere. The examples that are shared aren't really real. You know, that there's not lots of data-driven examples of maybe coaching cultures really making a difference. So people will talk about it, but when you go, show me where this is working in a real place that's like here, show me somewhere that's applicable, that's where sometimes there's a kickback. And when you do go and scratch the surface, and I've done a lot of this across, you know, the industry, you see people who win awards and you go and look at it, and sometimes there isn't actually that depth, or there isn't the substance, and people are celebrating success that's maybe a little too early. or maybe just an idea, or maybe just a launch of something.
Well, I think, success, again, it's definitions of success. So how do we define what a successful L&D team look like? And if that is bringing in a great LMS and filling it with 3,000 courses and training 10,000 people in 6 months on a new way of doing something, brilliant, we've succeeded, and that's awesome. But has it changed the business? And your point, I think it falls into, I created my own change framework, because what I saw is that I think that when lots of companies approach change, and this is true of L&D departments, is that we quite often jump in where I would say would be step 3 or 4. That's a lot of people's step 1, which is we've created what we know the change is going to be, and here's the roadmap for it. And if you're lucky, some companies come in as just a step before that and start to say, right, there's a change coming and these are the benefits of it. How do you know they're the benefits of it if you've not spoken to your people first and agreed what those benefits of it are? It's kind of like, you go and say to someone, oh, you don't want to use that hammer anymore, get this hammer instead, it's better. Well, this hammer does exactly what I need it to do. Why should I even bother? Why are you even looking for new hammers? This is a complete waste of time. So have that honest conversation beforehand of saying, from your point of view, why is it you think there's a change required? So don't go to your L&D teams today and say, we need to change the way we're working to this. What's wrong with the way that you're currently working? Is it a lack of impact? Is it feedback? Is it something that leaders are saying that what we do doesn't have value? What is it? Is it a purpose thing, that we're not actually fulfilling the purpose that as L&D people we want to try and fill? And discuss that with them. Let them come to you and say, well, you know what, yeah, it is great that we use this and we're used to it, and it works, but really I don't think it makes much of a difference in the business. Or it wouldn't be, I think it probably would be better if we said to stakeholders, we're not going to do it that way anymore. And I don't think that inductions really train people to do the job like we think it does. Oh, this is really interesting now. Talk to me more about that. Again, great leadership conversations and coaching again, because people don't like change being done to them. But I find on the whole that when they instigate the reasons for that change and they're invited in to be part of how that will look and what might be the alternatives, then when that roadmap does come along and says, right, we're going for it, they're already bought into the reasons for it. They're going, well, yeah, I already know why we're doing it and I already know it'll be better. Now we've just got to stress about how to do it. But you know as well as I do that if you just go with a roadmap, no one does anything for the next 6 months other than start thinking about, well, why have you done it? This is rubbish. This isn't going to work. Or does this mean that we're going to get made redundant? That people will make up all their own truths about why you're doing this change. So just bring them in to start with. Be honest about it and be clear about it.
No, I absolutely agree with you. It's just, I think it's, if you're in a multifaceted, complex business, bringing all those people into the camp, and it's that chunking it down. So, I've certainly been there in the past when I was in in-house roles, and you are literally the people are telling you what their business problems are, but they want to then give you a solution, and they want their solution to be their way. And, it's that, again, it's that building that trust and that coaching relationship with those leaders, and you see, and it depends on industry, there are very different approaches, and people think, like you said, if success is putting in a learning system and filling it with content, you're probably not answering the right question. You're just keeping people busy. But that solution could be part of your success if you've got the question right in the first place, if you've gone 100%. Back and sorted out what that purpose is. So what are we trying to achieve in this business? Are we trying to, upskill, drive performance? Are we trying to open up that leadership pipeline, in the way you've talked about, so we want to prepare our leaders better for the future. We know we're going to scale as a business. We're a startup. We're going to develop year after year, 100% growth. You can see the problems now. You can forecast those problems for the business, and you can be saying, okay, we know what's happened, because we can know in 5 years' time, we're likely to be a business with a set of people who've been vacuumed up into senior roles, probably not had time to develop because the businesses have grown very quickly, or conversely, in a huge business where people stay for a very long time, you've got the potential to lose that talent if you've not got a way of spotting them and bringing them through. So understanding your context and can sometimes give you that window in the world. But getting into the business, sometimes, what's right for the organization isn't always right for the individual leaders as well. And that comes back to culture. So it's
alignment again. Alignment again in conversation. So how do we align those things? Because I think, ROI, return on investment of L&D teams, is always a hot topic. And I just kind of go, well, for me, when you go to those senior leaders and you go to the CEO, asking them, what are the things that really matter to you? How do we measure this business, the success of it? What is that? And, there'll be various measurements across different industries. I'm quite close to kind of telecoms and call centers. So things like net promoter score and CSAT, profit, EBITDA, cash in the bank, all these things are measures of success. Therefore, no CEO is unfortunately going to give a damn how many people came into a training session or how many courses we've got on an e-learning system, on an LMS. They're not. And you've got to think, one of my signature really now is that I talk about L&D are so often the people that get cut when times are hard. The restructures happened, and then it tends to be L&D that are almost the first people that are on the chopping block. And we've got to start thinking about that to go, well, why is that? And there's no smoke without fire. That, if we're not adding value to those things that the CEO and the senior leaders see as important directly, clearly, and obviously, well, it's no wonder they're gonna sacrifice us, because the salespeople sell, the tech support people support, the training people, they fill an LMS. Well, we'll do without that. And that's not to belittle what we do, because we're doing it if we think of the right reasons. No one's deliberately getting up and doing this stuff on purpose. But at the same time, then, I'd invite your listeners right now to just kind of like pause in a second and go, next time that senior leadership team are sat around a table and something's wrong, cash is tight, times are hard, and they need to make some tough decisions, what is it going to take for those senior leaders to look at each other and go, we can't get rid of L&D though? What do we need to do to influence those people to think that way about us? And, we're not accountable as L&D people for the NPS and the CSAT and the profit and those things. So the best we can do is influence those guys so they go, I can't sell as much unless L&D work with me. I can't support customers as quickly and technically unless L&D are supporting me. I can't coach my people to sell more as well unless I'm being coached by the L&D people on how to coach.
Over the last 18 months, we've seen that really become quite polarized within L&D. So there are people that we know who have sat out, the last 18 months on furlough because their organization didn't see them as a value-adding function, and they were, okay, we can't deliver the classroom-based training you deliver, that stopped, right? So effectively someone's going through the P&L going, where can we strike and just put all these people on furlough, remove that challenge. At the polar opposite end, and again talking in the same industries, we've seen people who have been kept on and are part of that core crisis recovery team because they are so closely aligned to the business that they are critical to helping staff through that, helping think about how we make these new ways of working, because organizations have seen huge changes in how they're working, and those L&D teams have been part of that core conversation because they are an instrumental part of looking at that new way of working, understanding what our people will need to adapt to that, understanding how we keep that feedback loop going so that when we're all sat working from home suddenly, that we've got a way of feeding that bit back, of sharing best practice, and that polarization, and I am talking in very similar, the same industries where you've seen people we know in one company completely go, and that organization now bounces back and finds that they've got very few people coming back from furlough because they have effectively abandoned them. And then you've got other similar customers that are in that industry, and they've gone, we have got people coming back because they have been kept in touch, they feel that they've been developed. But a lot of that has been core to the learning and HR teams actually thinking bigger picture and having that conversation with the senior teams. And if they haven't got that in the first place, then they literally just become, we're looking down into the fog, we're seeing an L&D team, we don't really know what they do. Maybe they pop up 2 or 3 times a year on a board report, or they come and present some fancy idea every so often, or whatever it happens to be. If you're not visible, not aligned to the business, and you aren't visible yourself and got other people talking for you, you will get cut.
Well, it's the old plane analogy. The planes fall into the ground. We need to shed weight to stay up. What's going to happen? And effectively in so many organisations, L&D are viewed as being part of the luggage holder. We'll just open the bottom and let the cases fall out. What is it going to take for us to be like, no, this plane crashes quicker if we let them go? We need to keep them on board. And it's kind of I appreciate sometimes it's a slightly romantic vision that I have around the old story of the janitor at NASA and JFK talking to the janitor and saying, what do you do here? And the janitor saying, I'm here to help put a man on the moon. That was the moonshot. That was the purpose of the organization. That's what they were all striving to do. But most janitors would probably answer that question with, I'm the janitor. Or I'm here to clean up or tidy up or make sure that if the spills happen, I clean it up and all that sort of stuff. And as L&D professionals, I want you to ask yourself the same question, like, what is it you do there? And are you answering that in terms of your job, like a janitor? Are you going, oh, I'm a training designer, I'm a trainer, I'm a coach, I'm an L&D consultant? Or can you answer that in terms of the moonshot of your organization? How do you directly link? And I don't mean I help salespeople to sell. That's not it. I don't train salespeople to sell, because that's the janitor going, well, yeah, I help the tech people over there on the monitors to see their monitors better by cleaning it. Great. That's still not as passionate as I'm here to help put a man on the moon. How can you articulate to me as an L&D team and as an individual, as a department, how you directly influence that vision and mission and moonshot of the organization that you're part of? And if you can't, that's what's kind of reverse engineered when those times are hard and people look at it and go, well, to achieve this mission, who do we need? You can kind of almost put yourself in the head of NASA for a second and say, well, we can't get rid of the janitor because without him, we're not going to get on the moon. But you kind of say, how many CEOs would say that about their L&D team? And therefore, as L&D, what do we need to do to make sure the CEO is thinking that?
And I think, there's a few points on that. So, I'd probably add that in most organizations, people will probably say, I'm only the janitor. And I see that in so many, they belittle their role, whatever that is. So, that might not just be L&D teams. And I think it's really, the point you make about being able not just to repeat the vision, but actually being able to link yourself to that vision and see your direct impact is critical. And I think alongside that for L&D teams as well, to get close to that vision, understand the teams that are most critical in delivering your vision and make sure you're supporting those as well. Because sometimes we can get deflected by supporting the biggest teams, or, the ones who shout the loudest, or the ones who've historically had budget. But we're seeing a lot of businesses that are changing, that are evolving, that are adapting as well. So don't just stay near your biggest customer base or the one you've always served, but understand your business and think, actually, that innovation team over there or that team developing that new product stream are crucial to the success of this business, because we have a digital transformation strategy, or we have a new way of looking at how our business is going to work. And those guys, if you're not close to them when it comes to the next job, they'll be going, right, those people are critical to us delivering, because that's the future of the business. And we're going to talk to them about what they need to make sure that they're successful through these choppy times. So I think, again, take a step back, look to your business and look to the teams, not just yourself. Don't be so egocentric in that view, but look at the people you should be supporting.
Yeah, it's not about outdoing each other on the project that you're working on.
Yeah,
it's about that project landing and understanding why that project is crucial. And a lot of people struggle to articulate this stuff, James. I'd encourage listeners to just think for a second. I find reverse engineering the questions really, really useful for some people. And that is that think about your organization right now. I mean, the entire organization or company or business, and go, if that company ceased to exist tomorrow, who would care? And I don't mean the managers and the employees and they've lost their jobs I don't mean that. Let's assume they have all been they've just been snapped out of existence by Thanos, and and they just don't exist anymore. So no one's actually in the organization hurt by this. Just the company no longer exists. In terms of customers, why would they care? And when you can start to answer that, you start to really understand the reason why that company exists. And then the challenge is to go, right, how do I, as an individual and as a team and as a department, connect to that? And how do we help other individuals and other departments and teams collectively try and get towards that? And then you can start asking yourself the same question and go, right, okay, if that's the company and that's what the company's doing, as an L&D team, if we didn't exist tomorrow, how would it impact that? How would that customer, what would that customer feel? What would be worse for that customer because this team didn't exist tomorrow? And again, you get to that point, and it's not just L&D, it's any team. And that, if you go as an individual and as a team and go, there wouldn't be any negative for them, I don't think they'd even notice. Well, there again, you're at the head of the chopping block, ready to go when times are hard. But if and the customer might not be sitting there going, it's the L&D team. But if you can go, the customer won't have as great an experience because we coach the leaders who coach the people who talk to the customers. And we have the feedback and we have the senior leaders who know that without us coaching those leaders, those conversations don't go as well and customers leave. Wow. Okay. So customers would have a worse experience and they'd probably leave. There we go. Right. We're getting somewhere. So, I mean, it'd be an interesting one. So ask yourself that question now, listeners. If your company didn't exist tomorrow, why would the customer care?
I think it's a great question. And I can play my devil's advocate ahead of how people justify their answers to those questions. If they're struggling to answer it, you can imagine people going, they might not immediately notice, but in 6 months they'll notice, in a year they'll notice, and it's playing all that through, isn't it? Because if you're in that 100%. Ruthless Roman Abramovich moment, it's like, well, you won't notice in 6 months. You might notice in a year. Well, Roman Abramovich isn't caring about next year, so again, it's understanding that context as well. 100%. But no, I think it's a great question for people to ask themselves.
Yeah, and if it is in 6 months or 12 months, at what point, why will the customer care? What will they notice and where will they notice it? And how can you make your impact more immediate? So if it is going to be 12 months before anyone notices, then they'll just rehire an L&D team, which is what happens. Great. Okay. Tomorrow, though, what is the impact tomorrow? Because you're going to get brought in 12 months' time again, probably, because everyone who was in the organisation has probably left. We've got loads of new recruits and someone's gone, how do we induct new people? We'll have an L&D team. And so you're back on that same hamster wheel we were on before.
Exactly. And you're in that delivery mechanism and you're just fighting fires, or you're being brought in for a project or a solution and you're not moving beyond that. And I think that comes back to my question earlier of those people who are in that place. And it is, there's some great questions you've given them to ask themselves. And then it's how do they move themselves from, I've landed in here, my function probably came about after the last crisis, we cut the team, we were brought back in, our budget's tied to delivering some induction, some compliance training, a bit of potential development, and it is a knotty issue to land in that and just think about, I've got to then take my function on a journey to start to be able to answer that question, because I've landed in a place that wasn't rooted in putting the man on the moon, or ensuring that key customer is there, or ensuring people rush to buy our product as soon as it's released because it's the biggest event of the year to them, or whatever your organization's mission is. And if you're starting in that point, I think you've given us some great insights and questions to ask yourself as to how you start to build that journey towards that place.
Start it, absolutely start it small. Think to yourself, what is it that I could do? And then what L&D teams, and this is this is the good and bad of L&D teams, that we're sometimes not our own best role models in what we preach. So we'll preach, that people should have their own development time. We'll preach that leaders should coach. We'll preach all these things. And then quite often in L&D, we don't have enough time set aside for ourselves to develop, and we don't coach within our own teams. So start with our own team, because you know what, if, let's say, for example, you're one business partner out of 5 business partner in an L&D team. If you work differently than the others because you want to try something different, and you're doing it with your stakeholders and they're not doing it with theirs, then the news starts to travel around. Well, why is he doing it differently? Or why is she doing that? And eventually people will want to go back to the main way of working. So how can you influence your team's way of thinking about this to start with? And how can you collectively then agree? Because, one thing that tends not to happen well, certainly the larger organization that you go, is trying to change everyone at once. How can we run an experiment? So let's go back to that example. We've got 5 business partners. All 5 business partners are now of the same mindset that this is worth a go. And we're all going to agree that one of these business partners begins to trial that way of working. And when those other stakeholders go back to those other 4 business partners and say, what the hell's going on over there? That communication is happening because we know collectively with the business that that's a trial of a different way of working. And the results of that will either be worse, they'll be better, or they'll be the same. But whatever they are, we review it. Well, it was worse. Why was it worse? What could we do differently? Could we make it better next time? And let's experiment again. The greatest inventions of all time were never successful the first time round. And if you give up just because it was worse, we'd never have taken flight, for God's sake. We wouldn't be in planes, we wouldn't be watching TVs. So keep experimenting. If it's better, whoa, hang on a minute. What's going on here? Maybe we should all try this. If it's exactly the same, start going to some of your softer metrics. Well, it's achieved no more and no less, but everyone seems happier, or it happened a bit quicker. Well, that's got to be worth exploring as well. So start small, get people thinking the same way about this stuff within your own team, and then start to expand it outwards. Don't just kind of go rogue and try and do it on your own, because invariably you just frustrate yourself, as I've done in the past, and then you end up moving on and trying to do it somewhere else.
That's great, Rob. Thank you for joining us today. I think there's been some really valuable lessons and questions for people to take away. If people want to continue the conversation and follow you, what's the best way of them doing that?
The best and easiest way is find me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm the most active. So just look me up as Rob Moores on there. You'll see my posts and my videos. I've also got a YouTube channel and a podcast. So my own podcast is Leadership Untitled, which you'll find on all the usual places. Probably if you're listening, wherever you're listening to this one, you'll find mine there as well somewhere. And other than that, rob@robmoores.com.
Thank you, Rob. And all of those details will be in the show notes below.
Perfect. Thanks, James, and thanks for the invite again.
Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Learning Reinvented podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you've not already done so, please follow our podcast. And if the learning effect can help you and your organisation, please do get in touch. You can find both James and Katie on LinkedIn, and our contact details are in the show notes below.